All right. What's up, Rohit? How's it going? Let's get started. See if the camera actually works. Yeah, it does. Hey, there we go. It's a little off center, but okay. So this is a little bit new, a little bit different. Um, my plan here is to make this a bit of a um, like tech news podcast sort of experiment. Um, it's going to be earlier in the day. I've had a lot of people kind of talk about how the streams like later at night aren't super accessible for them, which is fair. And frankly, they're kind of difficult for me to do super frequently. So this is going to be like a short, what the hell's going on kind of like podcast type thing. That's the plan, at least. It's subject to change. So I've got a couple of things to chat about. First off, signal vulnerabilities. That's always fun. So this is a story from John J. Hacking. He's kind of a big one. I've talked to him a couple of times. Wicked smart guy, a little bit odd and loud about a lot of things. The way this article is written, I'll go ahead and post it in YouTube chat. If you're used to Twitch, I tried to live stream on Twitch again. It's not working. Don't know why. So here's the article. It's covering, looks like 2 different CVEs in Signal's desktop client. I don't love the way that this report was written. I think it's an important vuln, and it's one that people need to be aware of, and one that Signal needs to fix. But the way it's written kind of overhypes it a little bit. Basically, what the vuln is that when you send attachments via Signal, which if you're not familiar with Signal is a huge encrypted messaging application. It's a big deal. I use it for basically everything. So definitely a huge deal, and used by people who are far more important and in much more dangerous situations than I am. So essentially, if you send an attachment, the understanding is that attachment should be encrypted because everything on Signal is. When that attachment lands on your desktop, it should be encrypted. According to this article, there are ways that you can kind of bypass that, or ways that encryption just doesn't show up, essentially. Basically, these attachments are being stored in clear text, and even after you delete the attachments, if somebody replied to the attachment before you deleted it, it stays in this odd cache folder, again, completely unencrypted, and like just doesn't disappear the way that you would think it would, which isn't good. I'm not like denying that that's an issue. However, the next vuln, which got its own separate CVE, essentially was, since these files are sitting, let's see where the second one starts. Right here. So since these files are sitting unencrypted on the desktop, you are able to then overwrite those files within that like cache folder. And if somebody then downloads the original, or thinks that they're downloading the original file, what they're going to get is the changed one. So you can essentially take a picture of a German Shepherd and replace it with malware. Or in this case, I think he replaces a Pepe meme with a German Shepherd. So the elephant in the room here that I will give props, acknowledges at the very top, you need local access to a computer or a victim's computer to do this. The way he kind of pitches it is that if somebody is arrested in a nasty country, that might take that person's their devices and use these 2 vulns essentially to replace a document that was sent in a Signal group and replace it with a piece of malware or something else that's malicious. That concern is legitimate, but I don't know. I think my only kind of beef with this article is just kind of the way it was written, and that's kind of been, I don't know. I like John. he does some great work, but it's kind of been my issue with a little bit, a fair bit of his research is it kind of like overhypes it, and his writing style is a little bit odd. But cool vulns, and he details the research process pretty well, so I'll give him props to that. If you want to read more about it, I linked the blog itself in chat, and I'll also leave it in the description if you're watching this after the stream ends. But yeah, I mean, stuff like this, like chaining 2023 24069 and 24068 for fun and espionage. Okay, I guess. It just, I don't know. Maybe I'm just being cranky. I haven't had enough coffee this morning. That might be it. Let's move on to more tech layoffs. So if you're familiar, or if you've kind of been following from it, I was laid off 2 days before Christmas by my employer. I'm not going to get into the specifics of why. The severance package was significantly worse than what Google ended up giving their employees, what Microsoft has given their employees. I'm not particularly impressed by the severance package that we were given. Kind of sucked, but this is not about that. This is about other companies' severance packages, specifically Google's. Now, I'm not a Google fanboy. I'm not going to be somebody who's just going to praise Google for no reason at all because they're big and have a lot of money, and have done like cool tech stuff in the past. They have done cool tech stuff. I'll give them that. But this severance package is phenomenal. Let me pull it up. Okay. So, laid off employees. Let's see. Laid off U.S. employees will receive pay throughout the notification period, which I believe is 60 days. Okay, so let's keep track here. 60 days, let's call that 2 months, just kind of round up. Laid off U.S. employees will receive pay through the notification period, so 60 days, plus a 16-week base severance package with an additional 2 weeks for every year of employment at Google. So let's say I was at Google for 5 years. I get an extra 10 weeks of severance plus 16 weeks of base severance plus another 4 weeks, roughly, give or take, in the notification period. So you've got 4, 16, that's roughly 30 weeks. You've got like 7 months of severance through Google. And this is like, you're being highly compensated here. They also said 6 months of healthcare coverage, which is huge. My healthcare coverage was functionally dropped. We got switched to employer paid COBRA, which, not going to bitch too much about that. But that is a phenomenal severance package. Now, the reason why I'm not going to give Google that much props is they're Google. They can afford that. So like, let's not pretend like, Google's like doing this out of the goodness of their heart. They know that everybody knows that they can afford that. So like, naturally they're going to give a good severance package. But I'll give props where it's due. That's pretty good. An employee with 5 years of, hard, difficult, grinding work in Google deserves 7 months of severance. Now, here's the bonkers thing that you can really benefit from. If you're working at Google and you've been there for 5 years and you get this 7-month severance package, let's just say you're making $150,000. That's low for what a lot of Google engineers are paid, but let's say $150,000. You can very, very quickly find a new job. Okay, so you make $150,000, let's round down to 6 months and say you're basically given $75,000 for the next 6 months and let go from your job. Okay, so then you find another job for, let's say you take a pay cut for some stupid reason. You can't find a job that offers $150,000. You take a pay cut and end up making, $125,000. But in reality, you're making $200,000 because you're making the $75,000 6-month, paycheck essentially from Google on top of your new job. This is where a lot of people who get laid off can turn this into a very lucrative thing. Essentially, you're given free reign to work 2 jobs within a year and make both of those salaries on top of each other. Now, if you get laid off like me and you're making a fairly small percentage of a fairly small paycheck, it's not as beneficial, but still pretty nice. The only trick there is you actually have to find that job fairly quickly. Okay, that's about all I had on Google's layoffs. They laid off 12,000 people, so I mean it's fairly significant. I think they said that was like a 6%, like 6% of their full-time workforce. Microsoft laid off 10,000. Amazon's laid off around 10,000, I think. It was like a ton. Salesforce, 7,000. I mean, 11,000 from Meta. That's probably what I was thinking about. I mean, these are crazy numbers. Like people, this is the largest period of layoffs that I've ever seen, especially over such a short period of time. That's about all I've got on the layoffs. Let's talk LogSlash. So, LogSlash is cool, and I'm gonna share the blog here before I forget. If I can, let's share the blog. So, basically, there's this problem across enterprises and even smaller businesses where you have this balancing act of we need to keep a ton of logs in case something goes wrong, in case there's a security incident and we've got to report it and we've got to provide a certain amount of logging, or just to do our own kind of incident response. You have to have a certain amount of logs, but you can't just log you technically can, but you shouldn't just log everything for the sake of logging things, because it's very expensive to store and very expensive to access and process those logs. So there's like this really difficult balance that you have to reach, that most companies don't reach correctly. They either just store all of it and pay a ton in enterprise licensing to actually process those logs, or they don't log enough. Either of those two things happen. Sometimes it's not binary and you do both, essentially. I mean, we're talking millions and millions of dollars. Let me see what the article says. It's like, this has led the world to spend $215 billion on logging infrastructure, licensing, power, and space in 2021. It's 1 year. In 1 year, the world has spent almost $250 billion on logging. Like, not even something that's like necessarily business critical. Like, this is not part of your product stack. This is not paying engineers. This is not even paying useless people like CEOs. This is just on logging. This is on storing things that happened on your infrastructure, which is insane that almost $250 billion is spent on logging infrastructure in a year. Anyways, what LogSlash does, that's interesting. Let me switch over the screen. What LogSlash does is it's basically a concerted effort to minimize the amount of data within the logs itself. And you might say, okay, that doesn't sound good. What it really does is, if you look at this GIF right here, which I think illustrates the problem pretty well, you've got a list of timestamps, a list of hosts, a list of source ports. You've got this type field right here. You've got the domain. You've got the destination IP, the destination port, protocol, bytes, and the action for firewall. If you look at this, it's like almost entirely, or it's probably like 60% repeated information. So you've got this host, you've got the source port. Source port isn't super repetitive. The type is completely like repetitive. The domain is like 90% repeated. Like so much of this information is repeated information that you don't really need to think this over billions of lines, in like an enterprise system. It's a huge deal that all of this information is, repetitive essentially. What LogSlash is essentially proposing is to cut all of that repeated information into, I wish I could pause GIFs. Can I? No, I can't. Basically to cut all of the repeated information out and just store the information that's unique. So we're getting rid of all of the repeated source ports. We're getting rid of all of the repeated domains. We're getting rid of all of the repeated destination IPs. And we're basically just going to show how many iterations of those repeated pieces of information are we seeing. So we've got a bytes total here. Oh, gosh, I wish I could pause this GIF. This is so annoying. They also shouldn't store like critical illustrations of their like process in GIF form. That's not great. So you've got a bytes total, which obviously, like removes a lot of repetition. You've got the LogSlash value, which is basically saying this is how many times this is being repeated. And then you've got the information itself that's interesting. Not much else has really changed. Like basically this is just saying this exact line is repeated 8 times in your logs. And then this unique line right here for the evil.malware.su, that is repeated 1 time, and here are the unique things about it. So you've still got some repeated information, but for the most part, you're cutting down on it massively. Now let's look at the stats for it. In this simplified example, we can see, so this is just kind of explaining the GIF. We can see that Bob connected to Gmail 8 times over 443 within a 53-second window with a total byte count of 3365 kilobytes, and also attempted to connect to a malicious site once. So obviously the important information there is the malicious site that he connected to. LogSlash reduced the logs flowing into the log platform by 78% without any loss to the understanding of what happened. This can significantly reduce the cost to index, store, and process/search against log data, as well as reduce log platform licensing cost. So with a 1-minute time window on AWS VPC flow logs using normal corporate internet traffic, we found that on average, LogSlash reduced VPC flow logs by 50%. So there is essentially 50% less logs that are sitting there that you have to process, store, all of that. In a production environment where the same systems are communicating to the same systems thousands of times a minute, such as load balancers communicating to application servers, LogSlash can reduce logs as much as 95% on average. So if you've got a load balancer that's essentially sending the same information back and forth to your application servers over and over and over again, you can see like a 95% reduction in the amount of logs that you're storing. That is huge. And when you're talking about licenses that cost tens of millions of dollars a year, like you can really save a ton of money. In testing LogSlash with Zeek log data from corporate internet traffic, we found a reduction. Now this is where they break it down in traffic type. We found a reduction of 38% in SSL logs, 63% in connection logs, 83% in DNS logs, 91% in HTTP logs, and 93% in file logs. That is massive. So, the purpose here is essentially to maintain as much granularity within your logs as possible while also cutting back on the repeated information within your logs. And that is an unbelievably difficult problem. Like, we're not talking about something like simple that, you can throw like an idiot like me at to fix. John Althouse, I hadn't heard of him before now, but that's, again, because I'm an idiot, he created the standard methods like JA3/S and JARM that are built into many vendor products, including AWS, Google, and Azure. So I mean, he's a big deal. Apparently, I'm a nobody, but this guy apparently has got a great history in working on stuff like this, and this is a very difficult and important problem that he's working on. So I am keeping my eye on it. It's a cool project. It's something that can save a lot of people a lot of money, from big guys to small. So check out LogSlash and keep your eye on it. I think it's going to be something that I think a lot of people are going to want to know more about in the future. Okay, so we've got news out of the way. We've got cool software out of the way. I was going to... One sec. This is what I do. Okay, so I was going to do a rant, but I can't remember honestly what I was going to rant about. There was a really annoying software bug with OBS that I've been trying to figure out for ages, but I haven't figured it out yet. Ooh, that's ugly. So I'll get back to you on that one, I think, probably. I've got to figure out some way to get like multi-streaming to work between YouTube and Twitch, but you know, that's been annoying. Streamlabs OBS is like a piece of shit software. So just, you know, 1,000 people have told me to just switch to normal OBS, and I probably will, but I haven't done it yet. That's all I've got. Again, this format is subject to change. The time is subject to change. Me doing this is subject to change. Don't know if it's going to continue, but if you enjoyed it, let me know. If there are any changes you want to